An individual who's separating from another person does not come out of it a little more wise and a little more kind and a little more forgiving than before has lost one of the great opportunities of life. All of these problems have to come back to the person. And clinics today are beginning to emphasize the importance of not what happened and who was to blame, but what was learned. How did this particular occurrence fit the individual for a fuller, richer, and better life? How well did one of these persons take the responsibility of maintaining values, maintaining the proper care of children, kept right on doing the job that needed to be done? This person is the one who is growing. The individual who simply slips away because something else looks easier or the distant pastures are greener is the one who is the great loser. We are always losers when deliberately and without just cause we damage the lives of others. This is something we can't get away from. Now, in the West, we are not having very much basic religious anxiety. Most individuals have only one anxiety about religion, and that is death. Oh, everything else seems as though it can be avoided or evaded. But if the individual, in the best of his ability, has lived a solid belief, it is of the greatest value to them in an emergency. One of the most terrible and painful of all forms of divorce is that which arises from religious incompatibility, where a person will spend a lifetime trying to convert the other person to his faith. And I know several cases, one in particular, in which a wife for nearly 20 years prayed every day for hours that her husband would change his religion and accept hers. Now, a situation of this kind might be excusable, presumably, in persons of inadequate backgrounds or who had very little experience in life. But this particular family was well advanced. Both were university graduates. Both had traveled extensively. Both had worked together for years. But it finally ended in the death of the wife, who, dying, knew her husband was going to be damned forever. Now, this type of situation is something that this is an exceptional case, but there is wrangling over it. There is wrangling over a person, for instance, when two marry in the same religion, and then one changes. This is also very often a most disturbing situation, because one of the things that people have to learn in this world to live together happily is to give credit to other persons' beliefs. Let each individual believe that which is right for him or which he truly can accept. But all together they live the same code of integrities, honor, and honesty in daily living. The person whose religion makes him better has the faith that is best for him. But some people simply can't accept this. And there are groups of religious organizations that do everything they possibly can to consider it a moral sin if one member of a family cannot convert the other. This type of thing is getting a little less common, but is more prevalent than you realize, because there is tremendous competition in the various fields of theology at the present time. Another difficulty that comes along is when sickness or unexpected disaster comes into life. This is one of the major things that we have to face, and it may arise at any moment. But most persons are completely unequipped to meet it. Now, there's no real need to be equipped to meet any of these things in the rational or scientific sense of it. In the human relationship of marriage, the most effective and important factor is affection. If we love people If we love a person more than we love ourselves, we are comparatively safe. But the moment self-love becomes dominant, we are in very serious condition. And this, I think, is something that nearly everyone has to face. I know an example of it. I know many examples, but this one perhaps is pertinent at the moment. A man married a very lovely girl. They lived happily together for about 10 years, and all of a sudden she was stricken with paralysis. It was incurable. It was very widely spread in the body, so that she had to have perpetual care. And this perpetual care, the man who worked and paid the bills had to. He had to come home at lunchtime and take care of his wife, come home after work and take care of her, take care of the house, and raise 2 children. Someone said to him one day, "Joe, how do you do it?" He smiled and said, "Nothing to it. I love her." No problem at all. Now, this is the type of thing that's disappearing. And it's disappearing because of the fact that people are too much in love with themselves, too ambitious for themselves, and gradually escaping from the sense of community awareness. Now, this is having some interesting results. Today, probably, there is more awareness than there was 5 years ago, and a great deal more than there was 10 years ago. Why? Because world conditions are moving in with such a tremendous weight that the individual is no longer able to simply sit back and assume that he'll be a millionaire in 5 years. Maybe he will, but if he does, the taxes will be so high he can't keep it anyway. The problems of society are moving in. We are beginning to realize that we cannot separate ourselves from Europe, Asia, Africa, or Australia. That we are coming to the realization that from the standpoint of food, life, shelter, and these essentials, we are one humanity, and there's just no way of getting out of it. And we have to do something about the selfishness of individuals, which exploits the needs of human beings. So little by little, out of school, but in the job, we are beginning to realize the differences that attitudes make. That we are going to come ultimately to the point where we have to have some type of a communal existence in which, regardless of all artificial separations, we are one creation under one divine plan and absolutely required by the universe to work together cooperatively. All the rest is just going to fail and keep right on failing, and people are going to get hurt. And we're going to have multiple marriages and multiple divorces. And the things will not change until the individual begins to live according to the principles of a good life. Now, this is a real problem in education, and it's beginning to be more and more of a problem. We are discovering that we are graduating not people, but computer technicians. We are not graduating young people who can go out and in life and make a good life for themselves and each other. We are favoring competition. We are basing everything upon mental decisions. We are struggling constantly to escape from the selfishness of other people and the unreasonableness of ourselves. This cannot and must not go on, or we will destroy the most important integrities of life. If, as the result of the difficulties at the grassroots, we are going to have difficulties all the way along the line. There is no way of escaping this. Confucius pointed out that the basic unit of society was the home. As goes the home, so goes the nation. And as goes the nation, so goes the world. If we are going to have a world of broken homes, we are going to have a world of broken rules, broken laws, and broken hearts. If we do not keep the roots right, if we do not give the child the advantage of normal, cooperative affection in the first 6 or 7 years of life, the dirty work will never be cured in later years. That is the principle on which Comenius, the Moravian educator, who is regarded today as the father of the public school system, made very clear. Actually, learning begins at home. And our learning is the result of observation and reflection and affection. It is true that we have to have an education, but our character is formed before we even get into the kindergarten. And by 6 or 7 years of age, the future life of the individual is very strongly affected. As we look with people who are neurotic, who get into difficulties, who end in psychiatric wards, who go through one divorce after another, who lose one job after another, who are cured periodically of alcoholism and become the victims of various narcotic habits. Nearly all of these people have had a bad childhood. Now, a bad childhood doesn't mean that they were impoverished, but it was a childhood in which the family did not give the affection and moral support that the small child needs. The family wasn't living what it taught the child to do. The family was out doing the things it wanted to do, and if it was wealthy enough, had a nurse. But a nurse is not a mother. These things mean that due to necessity or to any other circumstance, when the family unit is distorted, disfigured, or broken up, the children and their children and their children's children will bear those scars for unknown years to come. And the scars themselves, accumulating, will bring down nation and civilizations. It has to start in the nursery school, the school of home. And it is in the school of home that religion is first given. Philosophy and integrities and the honesty of a child of 6 will live long after that child grows up. But without this basic root form of instruction, the future is very uncertain. So where there's a decision to make, where an individual can say, well, we could, by not having quite so many luxuries, give more actual time to a small child. The decision to take care of the child is tremendously preventive, because if that child grows up without that care, then 25 years from now there'll be another divorce on our hands. On and on it goes, continually following a very clearly cut pattern. Now, where there are no children, where the family has never been much more than an association, this problem of the child is not so considered or so valuable at a point. But there are other things that take its place. Any time that there is a broken home and it is brought to the advice or the attention of a counselor, he is going to find out various things. He will find out incompatibility. Now, incompatibility is a dissimilarity of character that is too profound, too deep, and too enduring to be changed by matrimony. Most of this incompatibility, if one person, if it is one particularly, is traceable to their childhood and the difficulties they went through. Also, it is very important to realize what happened in older days when family life was much more permanent than it is now. 100 years ago, in a smaller community, families grew up together. Each knew pretty much what the other family was. Their children played together in childhood. When they grew older, one or two of them fell in love with their former playmates, and the family sat quietly and beamed because they knew the facts of life. They knew that these families were on the same general economic level, that they had the same general integrities, that these young people knew each other from childhood, and there's every reason why the best could be hoped for. This is no longer the case. Many of these modern marriages are based on a 6 weeks acquaintance. There seems to be no way in which these people can rise above their emotions. Now, emotions are wonderful things, but emotions are things that have to be educated also. Emotions have to be trained to recognize values. They have to be built up to the point where they can appreciate what they can do to other people. And sometimes the kindest thing we could do to another person is to get out of their lives, because we are not able to take care of ourselves or them. But this is usually an indication of failure. And a divorce without marriage, without children, is largely a divorce of failure. It has gone bad because it was never properly accepted. An individual will learn to play a piano if it takes 10 years. He may learn to be an opera singer if it takes 10 years of practice. He will train for years for his job. He will do everything necessary to learn to play good golf. He will be perfectly willing to spend a great deal of time entertaining himself on television or something of this nature. Matrimony is a job for which each individual has to be trained. The basic training is in the home, and the secondary training should be education. The educational system should help young people to discover the basic values upon which a home can be built. As long as this is totally ignored, as long as there is no control, no education, no stimulation of a right nature, young people go into what should be the most important relationship in life, totally unequipped. Now, this in a civilized nation is regrettable, to say the least. And in a country that is as powerful and wealthy as this country, is a desperate disaster. There has to be and must be family educational program that doesn't wait until the situation is so bad you have to bring in a psychiatrist. There should be values by means of which we judge people, and judge the people we can live with and get along with and can hope for. Naturally, values are just, and both persons, knowing this, can work out their problems long before they become hopelessly involved. But there should be ways in which the individuals involved can so develop their own internal values so that they can be compatible. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem in which some specialized sect, some very definite program of courses is involved. The most important thing is to educate the heart, to find out whether it is possible for an individual to love. Most persons today do not even know the meaning of the word, and by the time they watch television long enough, they'll never find out, because it is more or less of a definite disaster. But without affection, each person is going to be himself to the bitter end, no matter how it hurts. Little problems are going to be magnified, minor incidents are going to be dramatized, and the individual is going to get into a position where he never forgets a hurt or a slight. If, however, there is genuine affection, it can be quite easy and simple for persons of entirely different educational backgrounds, even different racial strains, to live happily together because each one cares for the other. It is this problem of constructive caring that makes all the difference. And persons who have had difficulty in this field can, by a little thoughtfulness or a little charity of consciousness, or a little realization that underneath their difficulties there is still a mutual affection, can work it out. But it has to be worked out on one simple basis, that we care for another person more than we care for ourselves. This is perhaps the beginning of the brotherhood of humanity. For someday each person is going to have to care enough about all other persons to be a constructive factor and unit in the social structure. Until this is accomplished, the problems will never end. Now, if this division has come and the person is not able to get over the heart and hurt that brought about a divorce, then the future has to be faced. One person has said that nearly all first marriages are karmic, and there's something to be said for that. There seems to be some kind of an impact of the past upon the present that is very powerful. Perhaps another point of view on it is that the first marriage in life is certainly the one in which there is no previous experience in this life. The individual is taking on an entire change of life pattern. In any event, however, if a marriage does fail, the first thing that both persons should do, especially perhaps the person who is a victim of or feels themselves to be a victim of the separation, is to find out what it learned, what was achieved by this situation, what mistakes were allowed to grow until they became vast obstacles, what small differences of opinion led to perpetual irritation. Was the person too selfish, too demanding? Were they thoughtless? Were they concerned only with doing what they wanted to do, even though it might have been beyond the means of the other person in the family? These things have to be thought through to find out, if we can, what happened in ourselves that wrecked the pattern. If we can't find out what it is in ourselves, then we could probably contemplate a little upon the conduct of the person from whom we have been separated, and what they may have had as motives that may have been perfectly legitimate for them, but impossible for us. Very great thoughtfulness should follow a broken home. Of course, where the children are involved, a still greater thoughtfulness. And regardless of any other circumstance, both parents must be very careful that their separation does not work a hardship on their children. Everything possible must be turned to that. And I know a number of cases where accepting this responsibility with a sense of deep, reasonable consideration brought the broken home together again, and it was mended. But if that doesn't happen, then the person may be faced with a decision. Should he try again? Or has this become a completely disillusioning experience, one that can never be mended, and the individual either feels that the whole world is impossible, generalizing on his own particular, or that he is simply incapable of a successful marriage? Such difficulties, however, are not real. Any person who is in desire of a home can help to have one. But he must have learned something. Both persons must have learned something from the mistake. And if they've learned something, it ends in a benefit ultimately for all concerned. If it was a mistake and separation was really indicated, then these persons are free to try to build a life again. Here all kinds of economic factors come in. Young people today are worried over the cost of marriage, particularly of alimony and child support and things of this nature. An individual is married only a few months, it may be stripped sufficiently so that another marriage is practically economically unfeasible. So to find out all of these matters carefully and thoughtfully will indicate ultimately that a second marriage can, and very often is, more successful. It is more successful because there is greater experience behind it. It is more successful because it is often preceded by a broken home for both persons involved. and therefore they have learned a great deal and have perhaps recognized enough faults in themselves which they are not going to permit to damage a future union. Under normal conditions, remarriages are sometimes more successful than an original marriage because of the greater maturity, greater experience, and perhaps a certain amount of self-censure which is seeking constantly to find a justification. Now, philosophically speaking, we can sum the whole situation up in a very basic manner. Basically, as according to Scripture and according to nature, the marriage ceremony is a sanctification of the perpetuation of the race. It is the union of two human beings to perpetuate the ages, to make sure there are futures for all the world, and also that we are fulfilling a natural urge, one of which must be fulfilled. It is an urge that is planted in the human being by the laws of nature, by the rules of nature, by the most profound and lasting relationships of nature, and must never be taken as something trivial, something impermanent, something secondary in value and significance. Therefore, any system which in one way or another depreciates marriage and depreciates permanent relationships between people is dangerous to the common good. The idea of just drifting along without responsibility may favor the selfishness in the person, and there are many who are following that course today. But the individual who runs away from a potential responsibility that is reasonable and proper is only cheating himself. The whole structure of nature for the human being is based upon the home, based upon permanent values helping each generation to grow. Progress is not in the laboratory primarily, or in the courts of law, nor in the wheels of industry, nor in bank accounts and investments. Progress is in terms of human integrities, and the custodian of basic integrities is always the home unit. This is more important than wealth or fame or distinction. It is more important than the gratification of any appetites or dissipations that we may have. Because actually, this process of perpetuating humanity is the way in which progress is achieved. If the child is wiser than the father, if in time going by each child learns something about the future and becomes a properly matured person capable of becoming a parent, this type of thing is progress. It is the thing that we are all trying for. But we are trying to do it politically, and the politicians had bad childhoods. We are trying to do it industrially, and the industrialists are selfish and self-centered. We are trying to do it religiously, and theology is for the most part in conflict with itself, and therefore unable to give us a united support. It is true that religion is never divided. There are 72 names of God, but there is only one God. There are many names for love, but there is only one love that is real, and that is the one that suffereth long and is kind. All the agitations, all the drama, all the emotional falderall is of no basic significance except that it delays world peace, it delays social equalities, and it delays the progress of a proper industrial and economic structure. All of these things are damaged by the individual who is unwilling to grow up, but insists upon being a perpetual adolescent with nothing on their mind but themselves. Consequently, if we are willing to think in terms of a proper home, then we should start with our own and make sure that it's as good as we can make it. And if it is not as good as we can make it, then it is our problem to find out whether we love someone else more than we love ourselves. If we do, the home will endure. If it does not endure, because of factors completely beyond our control, then we must learn the result of either some deficiency in our own insight or some inability of the other person to express themselves. Then we have to call it off, but never with bitterness. Always grateful for an experience, even if it was hard. Always glad we have gone through something and come out of it better people. Always grateful to nature for the laws which help to build a family and home, and grateful to God for the power that has been bestowed in us, by which we may become godlike in the sense of serving others with no thought of ourselves. All of these things should be part of the education of children. The child should grow up realizing that it has two lives to live. One to make a living physically, and the other to make a life internally. And when one is sacrificed to the other, there is always difficulty. But nature, which likes variety and does not believe in an individual going for 60 years in one job in order to end up manager of the business, nature doesn't like that. That is something that man does because he is selfish and desirous of getting every possible advantage he can industrially and economically. What is actually the real problem in this whole situation is that the individual, in all of the relationships of life, has got to learn that there is a basic human relationship. It is a phase of what we call love. Jesus says, "Love ye one another." And if we really loved one another, the divorce rate would drop about 90%. But when we keep on loving ourselves best, it stays the way it is. And if it breaks because of another person that we cannot prevent, this does not mean that we have to hate them. We can continue to love them enough to let them go their way and do the thing that they feel is right. It's very much like children. A broken home is like children leaving home. It has to happen sometimes. But it must always happen with blessing and with love and affection and the best of good wishes for the future. These things maybe will seem a little too excessive when you're in the middle of a bad argument, but unless we have this realization in ourselves, it is not the divorce that damages us most. It is our own attitude toward it. If the divorce is a tragedy from which we will never survive, and this divorce is due entirely to another unreasonable and impossible person, then the psychotic consequence goes into various frustrations and neuroses and very often ends in psychosis. We cannot damage ourselves by hating anybody. We can't afford it. We can't damage ourselves by blaming other people for all of our troubles. We most succeed in mental health, emotional health, and spiritual integrity when we stand firmly for our principles, do the best we can, be as kind as we know, and as unselfish as possible. These are the assets, but they're the very things that young people today are taught not to have. Because if they have those things, they will never be rich. But it is better, perhaps, to lose all that we have in the world than it is to lose our own soul. And the victory of soul over circumstance is the victory of love over every disaster, every problem, every mysterious incident. Love God, and we will be strong. Love people, and gradually we will come to understand them. Love truth, and we can have it someday. Love all these good things. Love the little birds and the animals and the flowers and the sunset. Let love lead all things. And those who have learned to love life as it is will be able to love some other person of that life which they have selected to go with them. It is all the victory of unselfishness. Love is truly returned and perfected in the simple thing, that it is perfected in loving and not in being loved. St. Francis de Assisi made this point very clearly. The great thing is not that somebody else loves us. The great thing is that we love others for what they are and as they are, and serve them forever in the name of God and humanity. If we keep these points more or less in mind, I think it'll help us to get a message out of a divorce and help us to build a new home which is going to go on, and also to protect young people in a broken home who must learn to understand. And they cannot understand unless some grown-up person tells them, teaches them, helps them, shows them the way. In this critical time, we have to face what happens. But with the facing of things that happen, we must never lose sight of the basic purpose for life, and that is the fulfillment of the release of our own divinity. And that is proven by one thing. We grow to the degree that love matures. We shrink to the degree that love is defeated in us. We grow by love and by striving toward not only a love of God, but in the name of the love of God, love of each other. Love can cure most maladies of the human mind, but we have to really have it. And I think wisdom, philosophy, mysticism, faith of all kinds, art, music, all beautiful things help love to grow. All carelessness and thoughtlessness, all deformities of attitudes, shrinks that power in ourselves which should enable us to fulfill the 70, 80, 90 years that we live here graciously and purposefully, so that we can truly leave this world better than when we came to it. If we keep this in mind, I think it'll all work out. Thank you very much.